Hi everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to take a look at 5 players that I believe are not being spoken about anywhere near enough ahead of Game Week 26 and beyond. So first up, Aston Villa players are going to be really interesting in the next few game weeks. Ollie Watkins is in most people's teams. We don't need to talk about him today. And I think the most popular option in midfield, if you're picking up an Aston Villa player, will undoubtedly be Douglas Luiz. Obviously, on penalties, the underlying data is pretty decent. But if you want something a little bit more flair pick, then Leon Bailey could be the answer. Now, Douglas Luiz probably going to be sitting a little bit deeper in the next few matches with Kamara out injured. So I'd imagine that his attacking potential, at least from open play, is going to be slightly hindered. I don't think that makes him a bad option. He's obviously still on penalties and gets set pieces and still finds himself in and around the box. But if that does put you off ever so slightly, then Leon Bailey at 5.6 million could be a really interesting alternative. His underlying data is fantastic and actually better than Douglas Luiz's anyway. So 0.26 XG per 90 combined with the XA per 90 combines to make it 0.6 XGI per 90 across the season. Now, at 3.5% ownership, he's extremely differential. Most people are going to be going to Douglas Luiz, as I mentioned, if they are looking at an Aston Villa midfielder. And I guess the question is, why is it so important to be looking at Villa players right now? Well, the next 3 fixtures, I would say, are very, very promising for attacking returns. Nottingham Forest at home, Luton away from home. That's going to be a cracker of a game. We should expect plenty of goals in that end to end. And then Tottenham, again, much like Luton in the sense that they will go for the throat. So we expect chances at both ends of that match. And then, importantly, game week 29 is on the horizon now. That is going to be a big blank game week. And in that game week, Aston Villa and West Ham are both confirmed to be playing each other. Both are out of the FA Cup, so their fixture will definitely go ahead in game week 29. That makes Aston Villa players, and to a lesser extent West Ham players, quite appealing for the next stretch. And because Villa have a really good set of fixtures, not just up to game week 29, but including 29 and then 30 afterwards as well, it makes them a really interesting team to be looking at options from. Now, Bailey will be the less interesting out of Douglas Luiz and him in midfield, but the data suggests that he could be a really interesting differential pick. 14 attacking returns this season, and I think most Villa fans would accept and agree with the fact that he's been in phenomenal form recently as well, passing the eye test with flying colours. And most people would be maybe worried about the expected minutes. He has been a rotation risk at times this season, but the way he's playing at the moment, I think he is less of a risk than he has been in the past. And if you want to take that punt, especially on the low ownership, he could be one of those players that could go off in any given game week with 2 returns, couple of bonus points, and really soar you up the ranks. And with Douglas Luiz, no question, he's the safer pick. He gets 90 minutes every week. He's got the penalties. But because you can't rely on penalties and because he might be playing in a deeper role, Bailey could be the answer, and a very differential one at that. So I was quite surprised when I first looked up Martin Ødegaard's ownership and saw that it was still hovering around 15%. Now, I think it's fair to say that in most engaged managers' teams, he's not really been a factor for quite a while. I think that 15% ownership are likely going to be zombie teams or dead teams. Not many in the top 500k to a million will have Martin Ødegaard at the moment. If you do, then fantastic. Then you're doing really well. I think he's going to be a great pick for the next few game weeks. But I think considering his effective ownership in the top ranks, he is still very differential. And if you wanted to hop on him now, then you could get very good marginal gains over the players around your rank as well. The underlying data is still very good, over 0.5 XGI per 90. And Arsenal, I think that's the play here. The fact that Arsenal are doing so well, 11 goals in their last 2 games. They've come back from their winter training camp, and they just look a different team. They look free-flowing. They look like they're able to get their attacking options into really promising positions, and they're just ripping through teams at the moment. With that in mind, Newcastle have the worst underlying defensive data in the last 6, and I think 18th across the season. So that is another fixture that you'd really want to have Arsenal attackers in. Then Sheffield United in game week 27, we've just seen them get pumped by Brighton 5-0 as well. I would heavily expect Arsenal to do the same. So those are 2 really good game weeks for Arsenal. And having 2 attackers rather than the one. I think Saka's in a lot of teams at the moment, but doubling up on their attack might be a really prudent move. 8.4 million is expensive. He's not easy to get to, but if you've got the funds spare, Diogo Jota's going to be transferred out for a lot of players this week. Darwin Núñez as well will be transferred out. Even Richarlison might get transferred out by a lot of managers. Martin Ødegaard isn't far off of any of those players' price points, so you could get across to him fairly easily. And if you back Arsenal to continue their good run of form in front of goal, he could be another really fantastic differential option and could be the sort of player that provides explosive returns, not just the odd assist here or there. We know that he's got that in his locker, and whilst at times this season he's been sitting deeper, not really getting involved in the attack, in the last couple of game weeks since they've come back from their training camp, he looks like he's finding spaces in and around the edge of the box. He scored his first goal in a while in game week 25, and I expect those attacking returns to start flowing for him once again, the way that Arsenal are playing and setting up to favour these attacking options all of a sudden. So I think if you've got a spare Arsenal slot, do consider Martin Ødegaard. I know it'll be tempting to double up on the defence, and it's something that I'm also considering, but you could equally get added benefit from doubling up in attack as well. So Martin Ødegaard would be high on my list of differentials to be looking at ahead of the next two fixtures in particular. So popular earlier on this season, but kind of a forgotten man recently because he went off to the Asia Cup, hasn't been a factor in FPL for a little while, means that Hwang Hee-chan's ownership has dropped under 5% now. He's 3.3% owned. And considering he's a 5.5 million midfielder in FPL, and he's gotten 10 goals already this season in limited minutes because he did go off to the Asia Cup as well, I think he's sneaking under the radar majorly at the moment. I think maybe a few content creators might start talking about him a little bit this week now that he's come back and he's got a start under his belt again. But I think it's fair to say he will remain very differential in game week 26, despite the fact that, much like what I was just talking about with Arsenal, Wolves also have a great few fixtures coming up as well. Sheffield United at home, you'd back them to score several goals in that. Then Newcastle, again, I discussed that with Arsenal in mind as well. They are conceding a lot of chances at the moment. One of the worst defences in the league statistically. Wolves could easily capitalise on that, even away from home. Then 28 against Fulham, absolutely fine as well. And then Bournemouth isn't necessarily going to be a blank game week in 29 either. I think it is definitely on the likely side that it will be a blank, so heads up on that. But it's still not out of the question that Leicester pull off an upset against Bournemouth and Leicester go through in the FA Cup, crashing Bournemouth out, and then also Wolves go out against Brighton. It could certainly happen. There is a universe where that does occur. But at 5.5 million, for the next 3 game weeks, I think he's absolutely fine to jump on and then maybe worry about that problem when we get there in game week 29. He's explosive enough that he will provide you the returns to make up for an extra -4 down the line if you back him to do well in the next 3 game weeks. And honestly, especially with the next 2 in mind, I think he's been massively overlooked. And the way he's been playing, just passing the eye test as well as the underlying data, I think for 5.5 million, you can't really go wrong, especially with Matthias Cunha out of the side at the moment with injury. Hwang Hee-chan's minutes are even better than they would have been anyway. And also, when you take into account the fact that now Hwang with Cunha out is likely going to be one of their key talismen, one of their key target men, with people like Pedro Neto, who is another really good differential in Wolves 11 at the moment, assisting him and specifically creating chances for the likes of Hwang Hee-chan, I think his data is going to improve in the next few game weeks, especially looking at the types of defences that Wolves will be going up against. So again, 5.5 million, if you're not convinced in an Aston Villa midfielder, then Hwang and a Wolves player, specifically either Neto, Hwang, one of those kind of players could be really, really interesting ahead of game week 26. So I promised differentials, and it's time to go really differential. 1% owned, 4 goals in his last 3 games. Rodrigo Muniz has been playing really well recently. And to start with, it was going to be limited minutes. He was going to be a bit part player and probably was going to get ousted by Armando Broja, who they signed in the winter transfer window. However, the way he's been playing, he's actually built up his minutes rather than having them reduced, and he finally got the full 90 in game week 25. So again, I think he could be a player that's being severely overlooked, and if you're playing a 3-5-2 and you're looking for that 8th attacker, that third forward, But on a real budget, if you're trying to pile funds into those main 7 attackers and have a bench player that is starting regularly, still getting good underlying data and attacking returns, and you can rely on him in some of the blank game weeks, Muniz might be a really good option there. So 1% owned, 4.4 million. That is about as cheap as you're going to get from any forward. And just getting a forward at that price that even plays is a bonus, let alone one that's playing and getting data and getting attacking returns. He could be a really good game breaker to make sure that you can pile the funds into the other 7 attackers. And importantly, a lot like Aston Villa players, Fulham also have a game confirmed and locked in for game week 29. So for the next 3 game weeks, you could just have him sat on the bench in 26, 27, 28, and then you can rely on him to play and get minutes in game week 29 against a pretty porous defence for Tottenham Hotspur. You're kind of hoping and banking that he will be a good option for that game week. And to be honest, at 4.4 million, just having a starting player at that price is going to be very, very good value for money. And he's getting the data, he's getting the attacking returns. Honestly, there's not a lot against this pick that I don't really like. And he can come in other game weeks as well. Man United, Brighton, Wolves, none of them I'd be particularly scared if you had an injury in your starting 11 and you wanted to bring him off the bench and just rely on him for a game week. It's absolutely fine. And then after game week 29, Sheffield United away from home. So if he impresses you in 29 and does well when you actually need to rely on him, Sheffield United away from home, you might actually just want to start him anyway. So again, very cheap, very differential, 4 goals in his last 3. There's not really a lot more I can say about Muniz other than the fact that if you're playing that 3-5-2 and you're looking for the 8th attacker, he's bargain basement and he's getting good data at the moment. Okay, so full disclosure, this isn't really a differential. Dominic Solanke is still owned by 18.8% of FPL managers at the moment. So this is kind of cheating, but hopefully if I explain myself, you'll kind of forgive me on this one. So apologies in advance. But I think it's fair to say that most managers are not considering buying Dominic Solanke at home to Man City on the face of things. But I think a few FPL content creators, and myself included, are going to probably start talking about him this game week. And actually, I think he's pretty likely to be one of my transfers in this game week. I've got 2 free transfers. I've got Darwin Núñez sat with no fixture in game week 26. And whilst there are other strikers that I like the look of that I'd like to bring in game week 26 who have a much better fixture than Man City, Dominic Solanke, even though it's a terrible fixture this week, I think might still be worth looking at bringing forward that transfer to this week so you don't have to spend an extra -4 in a future game week to bring him in ahead of Burnley away in 27 or that really crucial double game week in game week 28 against Sheffield United and Luton, both at home. He gets 90 minutes every single week, and that XG per 90 is sensational at 0.6 per 90. That is absolutely ridiculous, and that also matches the amount of goals he's getting this season. So 14 from 25 games, very, very strong. He's actually in the race for the Golden Boot at the moment as well, and he's still under 7 million as well, so incredibly cheap. He's getting great data. After Man City, it's phenomenal fixtures. And of course, we're all going to want him ahead of game week 28 anyway. So bringing that transfer forward to game week 26, when a lot of us will have the likes of Darwin Núñez just sat there with no fixture, you might be looking at bringing in someone else with a better fixture this week, but that's just going to leave you with another transfer in another game week that you want to be bringing in Solanke for. And in my team, and I think in a lot of situations, with limited transfers between now and game week 28 for the double or game week 29 for the blank, moving forward that transfer is going to make a lot of sense for quite a few managers out there. So if you're like me, you're in this sort of position and you're thinking, well, there are other strikers that I'd like to have this game week, but Solanke can score against anyone. He's on penalties. The data's fantastic. And yes, City's going to be a tough game. I don't expect him to score in that game. But even if he gets something, if he even gets the 2 appearance points, to make sure that I'm not booking in an extra transfer later down the line, he will be phenomenal value for money for 27 onwards. And his price is going to start rising really, really quickly by the time we get to game week 27 and then especially game week 28. So getting him in early on the off chance that he does get something against Man City could mean that you bringing him in at 6.9 million And by the time you sell him, he could be 7.4, 7.5 after a few price rises. And I couldn't confidently say that any forward that I brought in instead of him in game week 26 is definitely going to outscore him by 4 or more points, especially over the next stretch of fixtures, because I'll need to take that -4 as the extra hit to bring him in later. So just getting that move done now might not be the most popular thing, but I think in my team, and possibly in yours too, it could make a lot of sense just to get it done now, because we've all got a transfer ready to make in our forward line anyway. So there you have it, 5 players that I believe are not being spoken about enough ahead of game week 26. In the meantime, let me know in the comments below what you thought of those 5 players, but also, are there any players that I haven't spoken about today that you'd like to recommend as differentials to target ahead of the next stretch of fixtures? In the meantime though, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be really greatly appreciated, and I'll see you as we start preparing my game week 26 team ahead of the deadline on Thursday.